NASA research shows that reducing global emissions over the next 50 years to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement would prevent about 4.5 million premature deaths, 1.4 million hospitalizations and emergency room visits, 300 million lost workdays, 1.7 million incidences of dementia, and 440 million tons of crop losses in the United States alone. Addressing this global crisis is a priority to customers, investors, and employees alike. In fact, a study by IBM Institute for Business Value found 70% of workers and those in the job market are drawn to environmentally sustainable employers. Andy Wirth of AstraZeneca and Drew Getty from Perdue Farms joined me at the table to discuss why being an environmentally conscious company is not only about doing good, it's also good business. I came out of this conversation with the conclusion that the private sector has the resources and ingenuity to steer us towards a greener future. So let's get to it. Welcome to Conversations with Kelly, where we take a deep dive into topics at the forefront of the business community. I'm Kelly Basil, Vice President of the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. Today we are talking about a hot button topic, corporate sustainability. And I'm thankful to be joined by Andy Wirth, Senior Vice President, Supply Americas at AstraZeneca, and Drew Getty, Chief Compliance Officer and Vice President of Environmental Sustainability and Government Relations at Perdue Farms. That was a mouthful. I cannot believe I didn't stumble. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So before we jump in, I do want to give you each the opportunity to just share with our listeners who you are and what you do. Drew?
Sure. Thank you. Drew Getty. I've worked at Perdue Farms for about 12 years in a variety of capacities, primarily in the legal department. But a few years ago, I got an opportunity to lead our environmental function around sustainability. So I bring kind of a unique perspective to sustainability. Obviously, there's a compliance focus, having a legal background, but it's been very exciting. We're doing a lot of interesting projects at Perdue in the area of sustainability. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Andy?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Wirth. I'm responsible for the Americas Supply region. I work at AstraZeneca. I've been here now for about 9 years at AstraZeneca. I'm in manufacturing, so I'm not a sustainability expert, but we do have a very aggressive sustainability agenda. AstraZeneca is a top 10 pharmaceutical company, so we discover new medicines, develop them, manufacture them, and scale them globally. So it's really great to be here, and maybe just share a little bit about what we're doing. We are headquartered here in Wilmington. Our U.S. company is headquartered. We have about 3,000 people in the Wilmington, Delaware area. So it'll be fun to talk a little bit about what our Newark site is doing here in Newark, Delaware.
Drew, and do you want to just also share how many employees are at Perdue?
Sure. We have 20,000 employees nationwide. In Delaware, we have two major processing facilities on the food side. So our Milford facility and our Georgetown facility. But we also, just to step back a little bit, Perdue Farms is made up of Perdue Foods, which is the chicken company hopefully everyone's heard of.
I buy the chicken.
Thank you. But we also have a large agricultural commodities group, Perdue Agribusiness. So they originate grain from farmers throughout Delaware, throughout the country, primarily on the East Coast. And that provides us an interesting sustainability opportunity because we impact the environmental sustainability initiatives from seed to fork. So the seed that's planted with the farmer when we're raising crops all the way through to the chicken product that you thankfully enjoy on your dinner table. So it's a broad-reaching sustainability effort.
So I am not an expert on this. That's why I invited you both to be here at the table with me. I did Google corporate sustainability for a definition. And so I found that means conducting business while achieving long-term environmental, social, and economic sustainability. But I would love to hear from you both what that really means in practice and what does that mean at your organizations? How do you live that definition every day? Andy?
Great. Great definition. To make it very practical, and I'll use the Newark, Delaware example. It's a fairly large site. It's about 425 people. We produce about 1 billion tablets a year out of that facility and source tens of millions of packs globally as well as locally, regionally. But some of the things we're really focused on are scope 1 and 2 emissions.
And can you explain what that
yeah.
means?
Yeah, so scope 1, you can think about what do you burn at your facility. Scope 2 is what kind of energy do you buy. And so by 2026, we want to have 0 emissions from scope 1 and 2. So what we've done, so to make this very practical, we've put in solar fields at the site, used about 11 acres of that. It provides about 1/3 of the electricity we need. The other 2/3 we purchase, but that's clean electricity. Now, from a burning, if you look at our boilers that burn methane, natural gas, we get that from dairy farms now, which are producing renewable natural gas. So that counts as 0 CO2 emission. And that's a really neat process where taking dairy waste and food waste, combining them, and then producing methane. And we'll burn that methane at our sites. So that'll get us to 0 CO2 emissions. But I also think we focus on energy reduction. We focus on water consumption reduction. We look at recycling of our waste. So what we're trying to do is focus on those. But this is something that has really galvanized the workforce. They're really inspired by this. Everyone gets behind it. So there's some really good examples here that I can share a bit later if you like on some of the efforts we're doing. But that's what makes it real, is when you can go to people and say, here's what we've done. And I think that inspires people. So you hear a lot of people talking about what they're going to do and what they're planning to do and what their commitments are. But I'm proud of what we actually have done to date. So I think that is what really gets the energy behind this and the commitment behind it.
Absolutely. Drew?
Yeah, so at Perdue, we're guided by our stewardship value. I like to say that farmers are the original environmentalists, just because they have a vested interest in making sure that this land is here, not only for them to use, but for future generations. So that's really kind of our guiding light. And Andy said it, scope 1 and scope 2 is really where we focus our attention as well. Scope 3, I think, so that's everything else, right? Andy did a nice job of explaining scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is everything else, and I think all companies are struggling with, oh my God, how do we kind of start to map this out? We've got to map out kind of everything, cradle to grave that we use. So focusing on scope 1 and 2, focusing on infrastructure. So the more kind of changes, like Andy mentioned, solar. We've done a lot of work covering anaerobic lagoons at some of our processing facilities, just because that's a change that you make, and it's in place. It doesn't change when people change. It doesn't change when it's just there. And our focus over the last 5 or so years has been around waste diversion, water use, and reduction in greenhouse gas. Those are all things, like Andy said, scope 1, 2, you can control, you can impact the environment most directly. So that's where we've focused our energy and continue to focus our energy.
So I would consider both of your companies very deep in corporate sustainability, which is fantastic. But I think people who are, and by people I mean employers, who are just dipping their toes into this, figuring out how their company can lower their footprints, they see it as a big expense to get started. I'm curious, do you see an ROI in these investments?
Certainly on some we do, absolutely. So if I think of water reduction, there are a number of projects we have right now that we're rerouting our water to reuse it. We're actually implementing some new technologies to actually reduce the amount that we need. And those all pay for themselves. So there is a good payback on those. I would even say we have other sites for their waste stream, and ensuring that waste stream can be used as someone else's starting material. And so that circularity really helps. And so rather than taking that to landfill, we're now taking that waste and where someone else can use that as their starting material. So I think that eliminates some of the costs. So that's a really good payback. But you start to, when you really unpack this, you start to see, those solar fields, that does pay for itself. There is an ROI on that. So doing the right thing actually does pay back financially.
And it's also a good way to drive associate engagement, employee engagement.
Absolutely.
When you think about water use and reduction in water use, sometimes it's as simple as asking the associates, what could we do better? In one of our plants in Washington, Indiana, we learned from our associates that turning off the automatic sinks and just making them manual actually saved water, because they were running longer than they should have. So when you extrapolate that over a year, that project in particular saved 1 million gallons of water that we weren't.
Wow, that's so crazy.
We're thinking process, we're process driven, we're focused on that, but something as simple as, water use in the bathrooms can really help.
I am writing that down.
I love that you also ask your employees, what can we do better? Because, that probably sheds light on things that you're not necessarily thinking about.
Yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as the example I gave, but we had a real strong initiative around zero waste to landfill, kind of being really mindful of what we're throwing away, and we literally had managers sending folks out to the back to say, you got to pull that plastic out of the cardboard because we can't recycle the cardboard if it's in that, and that kind of opens everybody's eyes to, oh, I can play a part in this. I can be involved. So I think back to your question about how do you get started, it's just really start small, find projects that people can get engaged and take ownership over. And I think you'll really start to kind of see some bigger projects and bigger ideas just come from those conversations.
And Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've also found some of these initiatives as almost a revenue stream, and I'll quote it wrong, so I'm just going to let you take it from there.
Sure. So one of the things we've done recently is, and I mentioned it just a moment ago, is capping anaerobic lagoons. So this is part of our wastewater process. Think of them as big, large ponds where the water is going to kind of digest and things are going to trickle out. But in that process, it produces methane. And the larger the pond, the more methane you're producing, which obviously isn't something we want to do for the environment. So not a Delaware example, but in North Carolina at our Lewiston facility, we worked with a company called Green Gas to cover those lagoons and then capture that methane, which is then converted through a process that I'm not going to pretend to know all the details of, into renewable natural gas. And that was a great project for us because it not only, got us off, the bad list for emitters of methane gas, but turn that renewable natural gas into a resource that we could sell. And that project alone reduced our Lewiston, North Carolina facility's greenhouse gas emissions by 95%.
Wow.
And when you extrapolate that out to the whole company, that was a 17% reduction just on that one project. So I mentioned infrastructure projects, super important because, now we've reset the bar. Now we've got to keep going lower. But that was something that was just kind of out of sight, out of mind. But it was something we were able to turn into a revenue stream and something that was very positive for the environment.
I'm curious, why are your companies so involved in these initiatives? Are you being told to do it? Do you want to do it?
I think both, and I think for our sector, certainly in the healthcare industry, we are absolutely seeing a connection between a healthy planet, healthy society, healthy people. In our business, we actually see the effects. Wildfires in Canada create a surge demand for respiratory products. You can see heat-related injuries now skyrocketing around the world. You can see other forms of cancer coming that are environmentally driven. So we're seeing a direct connection between the two. And so as a healthcare company, we feel like this is the right thing to do. So from a top down, we're fortunate because we do have very strong, clear leadership from the top down saying we will be a leader in sustainability. So we will, as a company, corporate, globally, we will have scope 1 and 2 will be 0 by 2026 and 50% of scope 3 by 2030. So we really have to get our arms around scope 3, and that's really what we're focusing on. So I like your example of the waste stream because that waste stream coming out of your plant does create a scope 3 impact. And so it's great to see, and we have similar efforts underway to say, well, what are we disposing of? And it really makes you explore your business. So it's really a top down and a bottom up to be successful here.
Yeah, and like I said, guided by that stewardship value, that's in our DNA, so to speak, in terms of what we're gonna do. And in the sustainability field, as I mentioned earlier, because we deal with farmers from seed to table, by changing up some practices farmers are using, no-till, strip-till, cover crops, those types of practices really impact the overall carbon footprint of the product as we kind of follow the bouncing ball from seed to fork. And just because we're so connected to the the farmer. We're so connected to what's going on in the environment. Andy gave some good examples, but we just want to make sure that we're preserving the farm, we're preserving agriculture for future generations, and that's really just kind of driving the sustainability initiatives. We're also seeing, and Andy alluded to it, we're seeing consumers who are more kind of sustainability focused. They want to know more about what your practices are. I think that's new, certainly within the last decade, where folks are asking questions. So, a lot of what we've learned at Perdue is we've done a lot of these things for a long time. We haven't necessarily talked about them and made folks aware of here's our practices. So it leads to that transparency in terms of here are growing practices. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're impacting the environment.
You just set my next question up so perfectly. You talked about how customers want to know about all of this, but employees, we've also kind of touched on getting them involved. But do you think prioritizing environmental sustainability, does that make you a more attractive employer?
Oh, I would say so. I know just recently our Newark, Delaware site is going through quite a growth spurt. So we've almost doubled the size of the plant, which is great. So we've brought in a couple hundred people. And it was interesting to hear the HR leader sort of talk about, well, what are the questions that they're getting? And many of the questions, almost half, were about our sustainability and our agenda for sustainability. So I thought that was telling. And I think it kind of speaks to some of the societal pressures we're seeing around sustainability, people demanding more transparency. What are you doing as a big company? So we're seeing that. And I think that's only going in one direction. And so I think it's great if we're leading, others can look at us and say, okay, well, why aren't you doing what Purdue's doing? Why aren't you doing what AstraZeneca's doing? And I think that's really, we want to get in front of that, quite honestly. And I think that's just good business.
What about you, Drew?
No, I agree completely. I think, we're also seeing with younger applicants, they're kind of more engaged and kind of, they want their employer to be an extension of kind of who they are and what they do. So it's important for them that it's sustainability is something that's driving them, which we're seeing more of, that they want to sign up and work for a company that takes sustainability seriously and is moving the needle.
Definitely. Now, Drew, you kind of gave advice for people who are just dipping their toes in already, but I would love to hear from both of you. How can someone get started? And I know that was start small, Drew. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say start small.
But Andy, do you have any advice?
I agree with that 100%. I think start small. I think we can all do something. I think recognizing what your waste streams are, what your water consumption, your natural resource consumptions, just asking what impact am I having on the ecosystem by having a plant located here and understanding that. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of angles to sustainability that you could tackle. And I think it's important to pick the one or two things that you really want to be good at and just start focusing on that and engaging people. And I think that's probably to me, that's one of the key pieces. I like the story of the employees saying, let's separate the waste stream here so we can get the plastic and the cardboard separated. I think we need to do that every day. And I think if you get the workforce behind this, I think you'll be pretty impressed with what can take place.
Are there resources that you could point people to to help them get started? I don't know. Are there organizations or websites that kind of help with suggestions?
I think there's a plethora of solutions and organizations and efforts underway around this. I'm not a sustainability expert. I know there are those that have studied this, go to school for this. I've gone to Google, I've gone to YouTube, I've tried to learn as I go.
As we all do.
Yeah. So I think I would start there and start to get into the specific field that you'd like to focus on. But that's how I would start, and that's really how I've been learning.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say, I'll often say that it takes a village type situation. No one company is going to solve sustainability. No one industry is going to solve sustainability. Sure. So the more that you can work with other groups, literally ask questions. If you can connect with, a local environmental group and just say, hey, what are we doing right? What could we do better? Like, what's your perspective? Because they're going to have a different perspective, which is super helpful when you're trying to set up where do I, as a company, need to focus my energy and my resources, but kind of finding those allies who can identify opportunities for you as a company and vice versa. It just, everybody together, we're going to need everybody to impact the climate.
That's a great suggestion. I love idea sharing. I always say that the Chamber of Commerce world, we all share ideas with each other, copy each other sometimes when it's a really good idea, but hey, why reinvent the wheel when it's working? So I appreciate that chamber network, that we're all willing to kind of say this is how we did, X, Y, and Z. Before I let you both go, I do want to transition to our Convo Connection. I'm going to ask you both to give a shout out to a person or an organization or people that you think just deserves a little spotlight on. Drew, will you go first?
Sure. I'll shout out the Delaware Food Bank. We work closely with them in partnership in delivering hope to our neighbors, which is our campaign, and making sure that the food insecure, are able to feed their families. And the work they're doing at the Delaware Food Bank is awesome. It's inspiring. They've really kind of taken it to the next level in terms of what can be done in a community and how a food bank can impact many, many lives. So just a shout out to them.
It's a great organization, and Kathy Konevsky's on our board of governors. She's fantastic, and actually was on one of our podcast episodes last season.
Great.
Andy.
And Kelly, I would say to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event.
That was not a pre-planned plug.
No, it is not. But I think you guys deserve a lot of credit for sort of elevating the topic and bringing it to light and sharing it, quite honestly, because I agree with exactly what you said. There's no one magic bullet to this. There's no one solution. There's no one approach or person. It's going to be a collective organization, a collective society that fixes this. And I think this is part of the discussion we have to have.
Well, thank you for those kind words. My shout out will be to Goodwill of Delaware and Delaware County. You can check out their article in our September issue of Delaware Business Magazine. But they recently started a sustainable manufacturing initiative where they recycle glass. So a lot of glass gets donated to Goodwill. And they entered a partnership with Trex so that they can recycle the glass. I think it is so cool. We're highlighting it in our magazine, so everyone should check it out and learn more. Before we wrap the episode, if anyone loved hearing what you both had to say today, how can they get a hold of you? Andy?
Oh, they can reach me on my email address. That's fine. They can go on LinkedIn and contact me.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. LinkedIn, email, probably the best way to get a hold of me as well.
Great. And if you have any questions, suggestions for future episode topics, or want to get in touch with me or any of my colleagues at the State Chamber, our contact information can be found at www.dscc.com. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. And with that, thank you both for joining me. I do really appreciate the conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Conversations with Kelly, brought to you by the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. Before we sign off, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen. I know podcast hosts say this all the time, but your support is invaluable, and it helps other listeners easily find us. I'm your host, Kelly Basil. We'll see you soon.